No one in the shelter expected the sixth puppy to change everything. The rain had been falling for hours over Cedar Creek Animal Rescue, a small shelter tucked beside a quiet highway outside Asheville, North Carolina. Water tapped softly against the windows, and the scent of wet earth drifted through the cool night air each time the front door opened. Inside, beneath the warm glow of fluorescent lights, volunteers moved carefully through the narrow hallways, speaking in hushed voices as if afraid to disturb something sacred. In the maternity room at the far end of the building, a German shepherd named Hope lay on a blanket-covered bed, her sides rising and falling with slow determination. She was exhausted. Her sable coat, once thick and beautiful, still carried signs of hardship despite weeks of care. The shelter had found her wandering alone near a country road less than a month earlier. She had been hungry, frightened, and heavily pregnant. Yet even then, there had been something unusual about her. Something gentle. Something watchful. Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker stood quietly near the doorway, hands folded, watching her. At 38 years old, Ethan had seen difficult nights before. Years in the Marine Corps had taught him patience, discipline, and how to stay calm when others could not. But tonight felt different. Tonight, his chest carried a strange weight he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the sound of the rain. Maybe it was the way Hope kept glancing toward the room whenever he stepped away, as though she trusted him to stay. Or maybe it was simply the feeling that something important was about to happen. Dr. Emily Carter adjusted her gloves and checked the mother dog's condition once more. The veterinarian had delivered countless litters throughout her career, but she couldn't ignore the quiet tension in the room. Everything appeared normal. The puppies were arriving safely. Hope was tired but stable. There was no reason to worry. And yet she found herself watching the German shepherd more closely than usual. The first puppy arrived just after midnight. Tiny, healthy, wiggling with new life. A second followed soon after. Then a third. Volunteers smiled through tired eyes as each newborn let out faint squeaks beneath warming blankets. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the mountains, low and distant like an old memory. Ethan crouched beside Hope and gently stroked the fur behind her ears. "You're doing great, girl," he whispered. Hope lifted her head slightly and looked at him with amber eyes that seemed far older than they should have been. Then she rested her chin back onto the blanket and continued. Hours passed. The shelter grew quieter. Most of the building slept. Only the soft hum of ventilation fans and the occasional patter of rain remained. By 2 in the morning, 5 puppies had been born. 5 beautiful German Shepherd puppies, each carrying pieces of their mother's markings. Emily smiled with relief. Everything seemed perfect. The hardest part was over. But then hope shifted. Her ears twitched. A faint whine escaped her throat. Emily leaned forward immediately. "Wait," she said softly. "There's another one." Ethan looked up. The volunteers exchanged glances. Another puppy wasn't unusual, yet something in Emily's voice made the room still. Minutes later, the final puppy entered the world. For a moment, nobody spoke. Emily carefully lifted the newborn into her hands and stared. The room fell silent except for the rain tapping against the glass. Ethan stepped closer. One volunteer covered her mouth. Another blinked twice as if certain she was imagining things. Because the puppy Emily held looked nothing like the others. Not even close. And as the tiny newborn opened its eyes for the very first time, Dr. Emily Carter realized she was looking at something that should have been impossible. For several seconds, nobody moved. The tiny newborn rested in Dr. Emily Carter's hands while the sound of rain whispered against the shelter windows. The puppy was alive, healthy, breathing steadily. Yet every person in the room stared with the same expression of disbelief. The other 5 puppies looked exactly as expected. Their coats carried the familiar sable and black patterns of a German Shepherd bloodline. But this one was different. Its fur was pale cream with patches of soft copper along its back. Its ears were smaller. Its muzzle appeared shorter. Even its tiny paws seemed different. Emily slowly lowered herself into a chair and examined the puppy beneath the warm light. Ethan remained beside Hope, who seemed completely unconcerned by the reaction around her. The exhausted mother simply stretched her neck forward and released a gentle whine. It was not a cry of confusion. It sounded more like a request. "Bring my baby here." Emily carefully placed the newborn beside the others. Immediately, Hope began licking the puppy's face exactly as she had done with the rest. No hesitation. No difference. To her, all six belonged together. Ethan watched quietly. Something about that simple moment touched a place deep inside him. During his years in uniform, he had witnessed people divided by backgrounds, appearances, and circumstances. Yet this weary dog seemed to recognize only one thing. A puppy needed a mother. Nothing else mattered. The hours before dawn passed slowly. The storm outside weakened into a gentle drizzle. One by one, the volunteers drifted home, leaving only Emily, Ethan, and a night attendant named Claire to watch over the new family. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, the shelter grew so quiet that every tiny sound became noticeable. The hum of the heating system, the rustle of blankets, the faint squeaks of nursing puppies. Ethan sat in a folding chair near the maternity pen. His eyes felt heavy, but sleep refused to come. He could not stop thinking about the strange little puppy. Across the room, Emily studied medical records on her tablet. Finally, she looked up. "I have delivered hundreds of litters," she said softly. "I have never seen anything quite like this." Ethan glanced toward Hope. Could there be a mistake? Emily shook her head. Not likely. Hope carried that puppy herself. She paused. The real question is why it looks so different. Ethan looked back at the sleeping mother. Hope lay curled protectively around all 6 newborns. Her breathing was steady now, peaceful. Yet as he watched her, a memory surfaced. The first day she arrived at Cedar Creek. He remembered the rain that afternoon, the muddy roadside, the way she had emerged from a patch of trees near mile marker 22. Thin, tired, pregnant, alone. Or at least that was what everyone had believed. Ethan remembered kneeling beside her while shelter staff loaded her into a transport van. Hope had barely been able to stand, yet she had refused to climb inside at first. Instead, she kept looking back toward the woods, again and again, as though searching for something, or someone. At the time, nobody thought much about it. They assumed she was frightened. Lost dogs often behave that way. But now, sitting in the quiet shelter with 6 sleeping puppies nearby, the memory suddenly felt important. Emily noticed his expression. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. When we found her, she kept looking back into the forest. Emily lowered the tablet. Looking for what? Ethan slowly shook his head. "I do not know." The veterinarian stared toward Hope. The mother dog had fallen asleep, her head resting gently across the backs of her puppies. All 6 were tucked safely against her chest. The unusual newborn was pressed closest to her heart. Emily followed the sight for several moments before speaking again. "Maybe," she said quietly. The answer did not start here. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily folded her arms and looked toward the dark window beyond the maternity room. "I think whatever happened began long before Hope arrived at this shelter." Then she glanced back at the cream-colored puppy, and for the first time that night, she wondered whether the smallest member of the litter was carrying a story nobody had discovered yet. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and the lingering scent of rain. Cedar Creek Animal Rescue felt different somehow, quieter, as though the building itself was holding its breath. The storm clouds had drifted east during the night, leaving behind clear skies and cool mountain air that filtered through the shelter's open windows. Volunteers arrived early, eager to check on Hope and her puppies. Word about the unusual newborn had already spread among the staff. Everyone wanted to see the tiny puppy that seemed to defy explanation. Yet inside the maternity room, Hope paid no attention to any of it. She remained focused on a single mission: motherhood. She lay curled around the litter, occasionally lifting her head to count each puppy with gentle nudges of her nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every few minutes, she repeated the same ritual. It was as if she needed constant reassurance that all of them were still there. Ethan noticed it immediately. He sat beside the enclosure with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The morning sunlight painted soft golden lines across the floor while the puppies slept in a tangled bundle of tiny paws and twitching ears. Yet Hope never fully relaxed. Even when she closed her eyes, one ear remained alert. One paw always rested protectively near the smallest puppy. Around mid-morning, Dr. Emily Carter entered carrying a clipboard. She watched Hope for several minutes before speaking. "She is guarding that little one more than the others." Ethan nodded. He had seen it too. Whenever the cream-colored puppy shifted away from the group, Hope gently pulled it back toward her chest. Whenever another puppy accidentally crawled across it, Hope adjusted her position to create space. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it happened again and again. Emily crouched near the enclosure. It is almost like she is afraid of losing him. Ethan looked toward the sleeping mother. Maybe she knows something we do not. The veterinarian smiled faintly. Dogs usually do. Throughout the day, visitors stopped by the maternity room. Some brought blankets. Others donated puppy food or toys. The shelter often struggled financially, but stories had a way of opening hearts. Hope's story seemed to be doing exactly that. Yet despite all the attention, the German Shepherd remained focused on her puppies, especially the smallest one. By late afternoon, Ethan found himself thinking more about the day Hope had been rescued. The memory returned in fragments. The gray sky, the muddy shoulder of the highway, the smell of wet pine. Most of all, he remembered the look in Hope's eyes. Not fear, not confusion, concern, as though she had left something important behind. The thought followed him through the entire day. Just before sunset, Claire approached carrying a cardboard box filled with intake paperwork. "I found something interesting," she said. Emily joined them at the reception desk. Claire opened the folder containing Hope's arrival records. Photographs taken on rescue day slid onto the counter. Ethan studied them carefully. The first images showed Hope standing near the roadside where she had been discovered. Then he noticed something strange. In nearly every photograph, the German Shepherd was looking toward the same direction. The forest. Emily leaned closer. She really was watching something. Claire nodded. "There is more." She pulled out another image taken several minutes before the rescue team loaded Hope into the transport van. The photograph was blurry. Rain streaked across the lens. Most people would have overlooked it entirely. But Ethan's eyes locked onto a small shape near the tree line. He frowned. "Zoom in." Claire enlarged the image on her computer screen. The room fell silent. Hidden beneath a cluster of wet shrubs stood a tiny animal. Barely visible. Barely larger than a football. Emily covered her mouth. "Is that a puppy?" Ethan stared at the screen. The shape was difficult to identify, but one thing was obvious. Hope had not been looking into the woods without reason. She had been looking at someone. Or waiting for someone. The realization settled over the room like a whisper. Outside, the evening sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, bathing the shelter in amber light. Inside the maternity room, Hope slept peacefully beside her 6 puppies. The cream-colored newborn remained tucked safely beneath her chin. And for the first time, Ethan began to wonder if Hope's story had never been about survival alone. Perhaps from the very beginning, she had been trying to protect a secret that nobody else could see. The photograph stayed on Ethan's mind long after the shelter closed for the evening. Long after the volunteers went home. Long after the last visitor left a donation and disappeared into the fading North Carolina twilight. The image was grainy and imperfect, but the small shape hidden near the trees refused to leave his thoughts. By 8 o'clock, the halls of Cedar Creek had fallen quiet again. Only the soft hum of lights and the occasional bark from distant kennels drifted through the building. Ethan sat at the reception desk with Dr. Emily Carter while Claire searched through every file and photograph from the day Hope arrived. Outside, crickets sang beneath a sky scattered with stars. The storm that had delivered Hope to the shelter felt like a distant memory now. Yet the mystery it left behind seemed to grow larger with every hour. Claire clicked through dozens of images. Most revealed nothing new. Wet pavement, rescue equipment, volunteers carrying supplies. Then she stopped. Wait. Ethan and Emily immediately leaned closer. Another photograph appeared on the screen. This one had been taken moments before Hope entered the transport van. The image was clearer than the others. Not perfect, but enough. The small shape near the forest edge was visible again. Ethan narrowed his eyes. A long silence filled the room. Finally, Emily whispered, "That is definitely a puppy." Claire nodded slowly. "A very young one." Ethan stared at the image. The puppy appeared frightened. Small. Vulnerable. Yet something stood out immediately. It did not resemble a German Shepherd. Even through the poor image quality, its coloring seemed lighter. Different. His pulse quickened. Emily noticed the same thing. "Do you see it?" she asked. Ethan nodded. The coat. No one spoke for several seconds. The photograph suddenly felt less like evidence and more like the beginning of an answer. Across the shelter, Hope rested inside the maternity room. Her puppies were now 3 days old. Most spent their time sleeping and nursing. Yet the cream-colored newborn remained impossible to ignore. while the others resembled tiny German shepherds. This puppy looked increasingly different each day. The shape of the ears, the markings, even the texture of the fur. It all pointed somewhere else. Emily stood and closed the laptop. I want to check something. A few minutes later, they entered the maternity room. The overhead lights were dimmed to keep the environment calm. Warmth filled the air. The scent of clean blankets mixed with puppy milk and fresh pine cleaner. Hope lifted her head as Ethan approached. Her amber eyes followed him immediately. She seemed to trust him more with each passing day. Ethan knelt beside the enclosure. The mother dog stretched forward and gently touched her nose against his hand. Then she did something she had never done before. Slowly, deliberately, she nudged the cream-colored puppy toward him. Emily noticed it instantly. That is unusual. Ethan carefully extended his hand. The tiny puppy shifted closer. Hope watched every movement. There was no fear in her expression, no hesitation, only quiet confidence, as though she wanted him to see something. Emily picked up the puppy and examined it beneath a small lamp. The room grew silent once again. The veterinarian turned the puppy gently in her hands, studying every detail. Then she froze. Ethan. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Look at this. Near the puppy's neck, hidden beneath soft cream-colored fur, was a tiny patch of copper markings shaped almost like a heart. Emily stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked toward Hope. The German shepherd was watching them closely. Not anxious, not protective, almost expectant. Ethan felt a strange chill despite the warm room. Something about the moment felt bigger than coincidence. Emily lowered the puppy back beside its siblings. Hope immediately pulled the little one against her chest with a careful sweep of her paw. The gesture was so natural, so practiced. It was as if she had been protecting that puppy for far longer than 3 days. Ethan slowly stood. A realization was beginning to form. If the puppy from the roadside photograph and the unusual newborn were connected, then Hope had not simply arrived at Cedar Creek carrying a litter. She had arrived carrying a promise. Somewhere beyond the shelter walls, hidden within miles of forest and winding roads, a missing piece of the story still waited. And for the first time, Ethan began to suspect that Hope had spent weeks trying to lead someone to it. The following morning arrived bright and clear, washing the Blue Ridge foothills in golden sunlight. Dew sparkled across the grass outside Cedar Creek Animal Rescue, and for the first time in days, the air carried the scent of wildflowers instead of rain. Yet inside the shelter, the mystery surrounding Hope and the cream-colored puppy had only deepened. Ethan Walker arrived before sunrise. He carried 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one for Dr. Emily Carter. He found her already reviewing maps at the reception desk. Several photographs lay scattered across the counter beside a laptop displaying satellite images of the area where Hope had been rescued. Emily accepted the coffee and pointed toward the screen. I kept thinking about what you said. Ethan pulled up a chair. About Hope looking into the woods? Emily nodded. If she was trying to stay close to something, it had to be nearby. Together they studied the map. Dense forest stretched across miles of rolling terrain. Small creeks cut through the trees. Abandoned service roads disappeared beneath heavy vegetation. Then Ethan noticed something. Less than half a mile from the rescue location sat an old maintenance trail branching into the forest. It was easy to miss unless someone was looking carefully. Emily followed his finger. You think it matters? Ethan stared at the screen. I think Hope was trying to tell us something. By mid-morning, Ethan, Emily, and Claire drove toward the area. The sky above was a deep Carolina blue. Birds sang from the treetops while sunlight filtered through the pines. The forest seemed peaceful, almost welcoming. Yet Ethan felt the same strange pull he had experienced since the night the puppies were born, as if an invisible thread connected this place to the shelter. They parked near mile marker 22 and began walking. Leaves crunched beneath their boots. The scent of pine needles and damp earth filled the air. Every few yards, Ethan stopped to compare the landscape with the intake photographs. Finally, they reached a narrow clearing. This is it, Claire said quietly. Ethan recognized it immediately. The angle of the trees matched the images exactly. This was where Hope had been found. For several moments, nobody spoke. Wind stirred softly through the branches overhead. Then Emily pointed toward the tree line. That is where the puppy was standing. They moved deeper into the woods. The terrain sloped gently downward until they reached a small creek no more than 3 feet across. Water trickled over smooth stones. Everything seemed ordinary until Ethan noticed something tangled beneath a fallen log. He stepped closer. It was an old blanket, weathered and partially buried beneath leaves. Emily crouched beside it. Someone left this here. Nearby lay a small metal food bowl. Rusted. Empty. Claire slowly looked around. This was a shelter. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Not an animal shelter. A hiding place. A temporary home. Hope had not been wandering aimlessly when rescuers found her. She had been returning to this spot. Returning again and again. Emily carefully lifted the corner of the blanket. Beneath it were tiny paw prints preserved in dried mud. Some larger. Some very small. The veterinarian exchanged a glance with Ethan. A puppy was definitely here. For a long moment, they simply stood listening to the creak. Then Ethan noticed something else. A trail camera attached to a nearby tree. Old but intact. Half hidden by branches. Emily. She turned immediately. What is it? Ethan pointed upward. Within minutes, they removed the memory card and hurried back to the shelter. The drive felt longer than before. Every possibility raced through their minds. By early afternoon, they loaded the footage onto a computer. Hundreds of clips appeared. Most showed raccoons, deer, and wandering wildlife. Then Claire gasped. The screen displayed Hope. The date stamp revealed footage recorded nearly 3 weeks before her rescue. The German Shepherd appeared beside the creek, carrying something gently in her mouth. Ethan leaned forward. Emily covered her mouth. Hope lowered a tiny cream-colored puppy onto the blanket. Not one of her unborn German Shepherd puppies. The very same little puppy, now sleeping in the shelter nursery. The room fell completely silent. Clip after clip revealed the same scene. Hope feeding the puppy, cleaning the puppy, sleeping beside the puppy, protecting the puppy, day after day, week after week, long before her own litter had entered the world. And as the final video played, showing the exhausted mother dog curling around the tiny orphan beneath the trees, Ethan finally understood the truth. Hope had not simply rescued a puppy. She had chosen one. For a long time, nobody said a word. The computer screen cast a pale glow across the reception office, while the final trail camera footage remained frozen in place. Hope lay beside the tiny cream-colored puppy beneath the trees, shielding it from the cool mountain night with her own body. The image carried a quiet kind of power. Not dramatic, not loud, just undeniable. Ethan sat back in his chair and slowly exhaled. During his years in the Marine Corps, he had learned that loyalty often revealed itself in small moments rather than grand gestures. A soldier sharing water, a friend carrying extra weight, someone choosing to stay when walking away would be easier. Looking at the screen, he recognized that same loyalty now. Only this time it belonged to a dog. Emily wiped at the corner of one eye before anyone could notice. She found that puppy weeks before she arrived at the shelter. Claire nodded slowly, and she never left him behind. The veterinarian looked toward the maternity room at the far end of the building. Even while carrying 5 puppies of her own, the realization settled heavily over the room. Hope had been exhausted when rescuers found her. Underweight, pregnant, fighting to survive. Yet somehow she had spent those difficult weeks caring not only for herself and her unborn litter, but also for an orphan puppy that was not related to her at all. Ethan stared once more at the frozen image. Most people would call that impossible. Emily smiled faintly. Most people do not know Hope. Later that afternoon, they reviewed every remaining video file. The footage revealed pieces of a story that nobody had expected. Sometimes Hope disappeared into the woods and returned carrying scraps of food. Sometimes she brought leaves and pieces of cloth back to the small shelter near the creek. Every evening she curled around the little cream-colored puppy before darkness arrived. The puppy followed her everywhere. Even in the earliest recordings, the bond between them was obvious. By sunset, the truth had become clear. The orphan puppy had survived because Hope chose him. Not for a day, not for a week, for nearly a month. As evening settled across Cedar Creek, Ethan entered the maternity room alone. The windows glowed amber beneath the setting sun. Dust motes drifted through shafts of light. The scent of fresh blankets and puppy milk filled the air. Hope rested quietly with all 6 puppies tucked against her side. The cream-colored puppy lay exactly where he always seemed to be, closest to her heart. Ethan sat beside the enclosure and watched them. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then Hope opened her eyes. Her gaze met his. Calm, steady, knowing. Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. He remembered something his late father used to say. The world becomes a better place every time someone chooses responsibility for a life that is not their own. At the time, he had assumed the lesson applied only to people. Now he was no longer so sure. Hope slowly lowered her head and touched the cream-colored puppy with her nose. The tiny pup stirred, pressed closer, and immediately fell back asleep. Safe, protected, loved. Ethan shook his head softly. You never planned to tell anybody, did you? Hope simply blinked. Outside, twilight deepened over the mountains. Inside the shelter, volunteers gathered to hear the story revealed by the trail camera footage. One by one, they watched the videos. Some smiled. Others wiped away tears. Even the newest staff members, people who had known Hope for only a few days, sat in stunned silence. The story spread quickly through the community. Donations began arriving the very next morning. Blankets, food, toys, veterinary supplies. Yet none of those gifts felt like the true miracle. The miracle was simpler. A homeless mother dog had found a vulnerable puppy alone in the woods and decided that he belonged with her. No reward, no recognition, no audience, just a choice made quietly beneath the trees. As night returned to Cedar Creek, the shelter settled into peaceful silence once again. The puppies slept. The lights dimmed. The halls emptied. And inside the maternity room, Hope remained awake a little longer than usual. Her amber eyes watched each of her 6 puppies carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Only after counting every last one did she finally rest her head across them and close her eyes, content at last that nobody in her family had been left behind. Over the next 2 weeks, life inside Cedar Creek Animal Rescue settled into a gentle rhythm. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows. Volunteers arrived carrying coffee and dog treats. The scent of clean hay and fresh laundry drifted through the halls. Yet no matter how normal the days appeared, people continued talking about Hope. Her story had traveled far beyond the small shelter outside Asheville. Local families stopped by just to see the remarkable mother dog and the 6 puppies she refused to treat differently. Children pressed their faces gently against the nursery window. Elderly couples arrived carrying blankets and handwritten notes. Even people who had never owned a dog seemed drawn to her. Somehow, Hope reminded them of something they wanted to believe was still true about the world. Ethan noticed the change immediately. The shelter felt warmer now, lighter, as though one dog's quiet decision had given everyone permission to be a little kinder. Every afternoon after finishing work, he drove straight to Cedar Creek. He always found Hope in the same place, curled around her puppies, watching them grow. The litter had become more active with each passing day. Tiny eyes had opened. Wobbly legs had begun exploring the world. Curious little barks echoed through the nursery. Yet one thing never changed. The cream-colored puppy remained closest to Hope. Not because she forced him to stay there, because he always returned. No matter how far he wandered across the blankets, somehow he ended up pressed against her side again. One afternoon, Ethan entered carrying a small stuffed toy. The puppies immediately tumbled toward him in a clumsy wave of paws and tails. 5 of them bounced around the enclosure with endless enthusiasm. The cream-colored puppy followed more slowly, thoughtfully, almost as if he preferred observing before acting. Ethan laughed and sat cross-legged beside the pen. The puppies climbed onto his boots. One chewed his shoelace. Another attempted to bark and produced a squeak instead. The room filled with quiet laughter. Then Ethan noticed something unusual. The cream-colored puppy had wandered toward a corner of the enclosure where one of the smaller German shepherd puppies struggled to climb over a folded blanket. Before Ethan could move, the little cream-colored pup carefully nudged his sibling forward. Once, twice. Then he stayed beside the puppy until it reached the other side. Ethan blinked. Did you see that? Emily looked up from her paperwork. The veterinarian smiled. Looks familiar, does it not? Ethan glanced toward Hope. The mother dog was watching calmly from across the enclosure. There was no surprise in her expression. If anything, she seemed proud. Over the following days, similar moments continued. Whenever one puppy became separated from the group, the cream-colored pup found it first. Whenever a nervous visitor approached the enclosure, he was the first to wag his tail. Whenever a toy rolled beyond reach, somehow he became the puppy trying to bring it back. It was as though he had inherited something invisible. Not through blood, through example. One evening, after most volunteers had gone home, Ethan sat quietly beside Hope. The shelter was peaceful. Golden sunset light painted the room in warm shades of amber and gold. Outside, cicadas hummed beneath the trees. Hope rested with her head on her paws while the puppies slept in a tangled heap nearby. Ethan reached through the enclosure and gently scratched behind her ears. "You changed his life," he said softly. Hope lifted her eyes toward him. The old German shepherd looked tired now. Not weak. Simply content. The kind of contentment that comes from completing something important. Ethan glanced at the sleeping puppies. The cream-colored pup had somehow ended up draped across two of his siblings like a tiny guardian. The sight made him smile. Perhaps that was how kindness worked. One act became another. One life touched the next. A choice made quietly in the woods eventually found its way into countless other hearts. As darkness settled outside the shelter windows, Hope stretched, stood, and slowly walked over to the sleeping puppies. She lowered herself carefully beside them and drew the entire litter closer with a gentle sweep of her paw. All 6 puppies shifted instinctively toward her warmth. There was no distinction among them. No sign of which puppy shared her blood and which one did not. Looking at the family gathered beneath the soft nursery lights, nobody could have guessed the difference. And perhaps, Ethan realized, that was exactly the lesson Hope had been trying to teach all along. By the time autumn began painting the hills around Asheville with shades of gold and crimson, the 6 puppies had transformed from fragile newborns into energetic bundles of curiosity. Cedar Creek Animal Rescue had never felt more alive. The nursery echoed with playful barks, paws skittering across blankets, and the constant laughter of volunteers who found excuses to visit throughout the day. Hope watched it all with quiet satisfaction. She no longer needed to hover over every movement. Her puppies were growing stronger, more confident, yet her eyes never wandered far from them, especially from the cream-colored puppy. Ethan had started calling him Scout. The name seemed to fit. Scout possessed an unusual habit of exploring first and worrying later. Every morning, he inspected every corner of the nursery before returning to check on his siblings. If a toy rolled away, Scout found it. If a puppy became separated from the group, Scout located it. Somehow, despite being the smallest of the litter, he always seemed to know where he was needed. One Saturday afternoon, Cedar Creek hosted an adoption event. Families filled the shelter grounds. Children carried balloons. Food trucks lined the parking lot. Soft music drifted through the cool air while leaves swirled gently across the grass. Ethan spent most of the day helping visitors meet the animals. The shelter had never experienced attendance like this before. People came because they had heard Hope's story. Many left with tears in their eyes after meeting her. Late in the afternoon, a local television station arrived to interview the staff. Emily reluctantly agreed to speak on camera. She stood beneath a maple tree while sunlight filtered through the branches overhead. Nearby, Hope rested on a blanket surrounded by her puppies. As the reporter asked questions, visitors gathered quietly around them. Emily described the trail camera footage, the hidden shelter near the creek, the orphan puppy, the weeks of care. The crowd listened in complete silence. Even the children seemed captivated. Then the reporter asked the question everyone had been wondering. "What surprised you most?" Emily looked toward Hope before answering. It was not that she rescued a puppy. Dogs can be extraordinary. What surprised me was that she never acted as though she had done anything special. To Hope, there was simply a puppy who needed a mother. A hush settled over the crowd. Ethan glanced around and noticed several people wiping away tears. An elderly man removed his baseball cap and lowered his eyes. A young woman hugged her daughter a little tighter. Nobody seemed embarrassed by their emotions. Hope had a way of doing that to people. She reminded them of the kind of goodness that asks for nothing in return. As the interview ended, Scout wandered away from the blanket and toward the edge of the gathering. A little girl sitting in a wheelchair watched him approach with wide eyes. She looked no older than 8. Her hands rested nervously in her lap. Scout stopped directly in front of her. For several seconds he simply stared. Then his tail began wagging. Slowly at first, then faster. The girl laughed. It was a bright, joyful sound that seemed to ripple through everyone nearby. Scout carefully placed his head against her knee. The little girl reached down and wrapped her arms around him. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Across the blanket, Hope lifted her head and observed the scene. Her amber eyes remained calm, almost knowing. The same puppy she had carried through storms and uncertainty was now bringing comfort to someone else. The same kindness she had shown beneath the trees was continuing forward in ways nobody could have predicted. As the sun lowered toward the mountains, casting long golden shadows across the shelter grounds, visitors slowly began heading home. The parking lot emptied. The music faded. The balloons drifted gently in the evening breeze. Hope lay beneath the maple tree while her 6 puppies curled beside her. Scout rested nearest to her chest, exhausted from a day of adventures. Ethan stood nearby watching them. Around him, volunteers folded tables and stacked chairs. Yet for a moment, everything felt still, peaceful, complete, because looking at Hope and the family she had built, everyone seemed to understand the same truth. The greatest discoveries are not always hidden in forests or revealed by cameras. Sometimes they are found in a simple choice to love someone who does not belong to you, until one day they do. Winter arrived slowly in the mountains of North Carolina. The brilliant colors of autumn faded from the hills, replaced by bare branches, silver mornings, and crisp air that smelled of pine and wood smoke. At Cedar Creek Animal Rescue, life continued moving forward. Puppies grew. Families visited. New animals arrived needing care. Yet some stories lingered long after they should have ended, and Hope's story was one of them. Nearly 4 months had passed since the night she gave birth. The 6 puppies were no longer tiny bundles sleeping beneath blankets. They raced through the exercise yard, chased leaves across the grass, and greeted visitors with boundless enthusiasm. One by one, loving families began adopting them. Each farewell carried a mixture of joy and sadness. Volunteers celebrated every successful adoption, yet they always found themselves standing a little longer beside Hope afterward, as if checking whether she would be all right. She always was. Every time a puppy left, Hope watched calmly. She would nuzzle them one last time, then sit quietly beside Ethan until the vehicle disappeared down the road. There was no panic, no resistance. Somehow she seemed to understand. Her job had never been to keep them forever. Her job had been to prepare them for the world. By early December, only one puppy remained. Scout, the cream-colored puppy who had changed everything. Ethan found himself spending more time with him than he intended. Morning walks became afternoon walks. Short visits became entire evenings. Scout followed him everywhere. Through the shelter corridors. Across the training yard. Along the quiet gravel path behind the building. Sometimes Ethan laughed at how naturally it happened. Other times he found himself wondering whether Hope had planned it all along. One cold afternoon, snowflakes drifted lazily through the air while Ethan sat on a wooden bench overlooking the shelter grounds. Scout rested beside him. Hope lay nearby, watching the world with calm amber eyes. The sky was pale gray. The mountains faded into soft silhouettes beyond the trees. For a long while, nobody moved. Then Scout stood and trotted over to Hope. The young dog lowered himself beside her exactly as he had done every day since birth. Hope gently touched her nose against his forehead. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. It was such a simple moment, yet it carried the weight of everything that had happened. The roadside, the forest, the hidden shelter beside the creek, the trail camera footage, the choice that one lonely dog had made when nobody was watching. A few days later, Ethan completed the adoption paperwork. The volunteers pretended to be surprised, though everyone had seen it coming for weeks. Claire laughed. Emily smiled. Even the shelter director admitted the outcome felt inevitable. On the morning Scout officially went home, the entire staff gathered outside. Snow dusted the ground. Their breath drifted into the cold air. Ethan clipped a new collar around Scout's neck and knelt beside him. The young dog wagged his tail so hard his entire body swayed. Nearby, Hope sat quietly, watching. Ethan walked over and crouched in front of her. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Hope stepped forward and rested her head against his shoulder. The old German shepherd closed her eyes. Ethan swallowed hard. "Thank you," he whispered. Hope pulled back and looked toward Scout. Her tail moved once against the snow. Just once. It was enough. Months later, visitors entering Cedar Creek would notice a framed photograph hanging in the reception area. The image showed Hope lying beneath a maple tree surrounded by 6 puppies. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Most people smiled and continued walking. But beneath the photograph sat a small plaque engraved with a simple sentence. Family is not always who you are born with. Sometimes it is who you choose. On quiet evenings, when the shelter lights dimmed and the mountains disappeared into darkness, Ethan occasionally returned to visit. He would find Hope resting comfortably in her favorite corner, surrounded by fresh blankets and people who adored her. She was older now, slower, yet her eyes remained the same, warm, steady, full of grace. And every time Ethan watched her resting peacefully beneath the soft glow of the shelter lights, he found himself thinking about one truth. Some miracles arrive with sirens and headlines. Others arrive quietly, on four paws, carrying nothing more than a heart large enough to make room for one more soul.